Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome you to our weekly Kaffeepause. In recent weeks, we have talked a lot about the war in Ukraine and about Germany's foreign and security policy shifts, but we've not given as much attention to the shift in energy policy. And that's why we invited ACG Kellen Fellowship alumnus Julian Wettengel to join us today. He serves as correspondent for Clean Energy Wire and is based in Berlin. Julian, herzlich willkommen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Julian, I'm delighted to see you. I'm glad that you are able to join us for this important topic. Because climate change and energy policy were on the agenda on the campaign trail when the three Kanzlerkandidaten and the members of all of the political parties were trying to woo voters. After reading the coalition agreement and seeing how the various cabinet positions were being filled, what were your expectations of Germany's energy policy moving forward under the three-party Ampelregierung without even thinking about the conflict that we're seeing unfold in Ukraine right now and the impact that that is having on energy? Sort of what was the Ausgangspunkt for you in thinking about how this new government would take on some of the energy and climate change challenges that it knew it was bound to face?
I mean, the government from the start had to face very high expectations. Not only from me, but from the general public. You had a Green Party be in part of this government, so naturally, anything climate related, there were high expectations. I mean, first of all, I think the expectations had to be high, just with a view to what's needed, what's necessary. This afternoon, you'll have the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change coming out with their new report. The material is still under embargo, but I think I'm not giving anything away when I say that they will say again, this is urgent, we have to do more and faster to mitigate climate change. So anything the new government would have to introduce, it has to be effective immediately and really overhaul energy and climate. So that's expectations have to be high. On the other hand, I am a journalist. I'm skeptical by nature, I would say, and not really the optimist on many fronts. So just seeing these challenges and some of the tasks that they gave themselves in the coalition agreement, I still don't know whether they will be able to fulfill that. I mean, some viewers might not have this, or maybe just like the 5 or 6 main points of the coalition agreement in terms of energy and climate were pulling forward the coal exit to 2030. Ideally, they always gave this little caveat saying we want this, but supply security has to be guaranteed. They wanted to massively expand renewables. In Germany, that's mostly wind and solar power. They want to bring that up to a share of 80% in the power consumption, from around 40 that we had last year. They wanted to have only climate-friendly cars registered by the year 2035 or earlier. They wanted to do away with the renewables levy that consumers pay to finance the rollout of renewables. And they generally supported the European Commission's proposals for their large energy and climate package, the Fit for 55 package. So that's on a European level, there are many measures and a lot of legislation there, which they also said, that we're supporting this. And I mean, only the renewables rollout, what's necessary there to bring it up to a level that they aim for, is a task that I'm not sure that it will be possible. The pessimist in me says, I'm not sure whether that's possible. I mean, the country lacks the workforce that would be necessary to construct, install, and maintain all of that. What they want to do is speed up planning procedures and free up more space for renewables installations. You can see that there's bound to be opposition in the areas where that is needed. I mean, to some extent, you can do repowering, which means exchanging the old, smaller wind turbines for bigger, more efficient ones, for example. So you wouldn't necessarily need more space, but still, I mean, they want to have 2% of German land earmarked for wind power, for example, and then put solar on all new on the rooftops of new buildings. So all of this is a monumental task, and so my expectations is that not all those tasks will be fulfilled. And I mean, in the end, this government is a four-year government, so much of the targets are past that. So we'll see. And then it's a difficult makeup of a government. You have, like I said, the Green Party is in there, the Social Democrats, and the pro-business Free Democrats, what we call the liberal Free Democrats here. And while the Greens are very have always been very vocal on ambitious climate action, the Free Democrats, they also have the same targets, but the way they want to get there is, of course, much more market-based. So they're much more on prices and bringing these ideas together. And then with the Social Democrats coming in, also they have a focus on cushioning the impact on especially lower income households. How do you do all that and bring those three thoughts together? So that's another difficulty. So all in all, my expectations are high, but at the same time, sort of a realistic, pessimistic view on what will actually be happening.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think it's really fair to say that this new government coming in had very ambitious plans, but even before the current crisis, there was a sense that some of these plans might have been aspirational and might not be truly possible. If I think back a little bit before the war in Ukraine started, Robert Habeck, the Minister of Economic Affairs and Energy Policy, said that Germany had not met its goals in terms of building up renewables in the last couple of years, and that it would not meet the goals in the next few years to come. And of course, now the situation has become exacerbated when thinking about all of Germany's energy needs and Germany's energy dependence on Russia, and the impact that the war in Ukraine is having on Germany. So, as I mentioned at the outset, we've spent a lot of time talking about the foreign policy and security policy implications of the war in Ukraine. And certainly that's what got all the attention after Chancellor Olaf Scholz gave his speech in the Bundestag at the end of February. But he also talked about some major shifts in energy policy. In no uncertain terms, he said that Nord Stream 2 is dead. He said that Germany would look for new energy sources. And in the last month, there has been a lot of activity, but Germany is still importing energy from Russia. And many people are arguing that as a result, Germany is helping to fund the war that Russia is waging in Ukraine. So can you talk a little bit about what some of the cabinet members have actually been doing to try to recalibrate Germany's energy policy and to reduce its dependence on Russia? And I'm thinking specifically about, what are some of the things that Chancellor Scholz has been doing? We've seen Robert Habeck travel around the world looking for new sources of gas. Annalena Baerbock has also been outspoken, but how have you? I'm sure that you've been sort of following what each of the ministers have been doing, but can you tell us a little bit about how that has been perceived, and what your hopes are of what their actions might bring?
Yeah, of course. So I would like sum it up as the government now gave a new direction. Of course, you can only do so much concrete action within a month. I wouldn't expect that big measures would have been introduced and effective in such a short time. But considering that, actually a lot has happened. And so you have this, I think you used the word tectonic, the tectonic shift of energy policy, where over years and decades, Germany has built up this dependence on Russian supply. And now the government says we want out and fully out as soon as possible. Now, what this as soon as possible can be, they already said something that oil and gas, we should be pretty much out of the Russian supply by the end of the year, for oil and coal. And on natural gas, it might take a bit longer, but the government says 2024, it could be a realistic scenario. By that time, we're off Russian fuel. And in preparation for this meeting, I had to write it down. I looked at the past month and just wrote down some of the major announcement and policy action that the government took. And you mentioned one already, which was Nord Stream 2. So that was within, it was even like the day before the war started, before the invasion, there was already this talk about Nord Stream and what it would mean. And then it was basically halted. I don't really see a realistic scenario where this pipeline comes online, but who knows? I don't want to. This crisis really has shown that can't be too sure about anything. So I don't want to look too far into the future on some of these things. But it looks like Nord Stream 2 is dead. The government, and you mentioned Scholz's speech in the Bundestag, he announced that the government would finance or build 2 LNG terminals. Germany, until now, does not have any direct way to import liquefied natural gas. Until now, there has never been this situation where it was economically viable. So the business case wasn't there. Liquefied gas was much more expensive than the Russian supply. Nobody thought we would have to do without the Russian supply. There's a lot of import capacity across Europe. Other countries have LNG terminals, so they just regasify it, put it in the gas grid, and that can make its way to Germany. So there was never the business case, and I myself was saying to everyone who said, Germany is pondering building LNG terminals. I said there's no way, because there's no need to set up this gas infrastructure, which you want to use for 20 or more years, in a world where Germany at the same time says we want to be climate neutral by 2045, so in 20 years, seeing all the capacity that is there. So Scholz, that was another decision by his, he made pretty much on his own and announced it in Parliament without talking with the whole government. Then you mentioned Habeck, Economy Minister Habeck, traveling to Qatar and the United Arab Emirates to clinch deals on gas and hydrogen. That brought him a lot of criticism from people who said, well, you're just basically exchanging one criminal supplier with another. So that's been a constant discussion over recent weeks as well here. Then the government announced the creation of strategic coal and gas reserves to ensure supply security in the future. It has since emphasized the need for renewables buildup. I mean, I talked about the coalition agreement, and that was already ambitious. And now they put more and more emphasis on this and say the energy transition, and especially the build out of renewables, has to happen a lot faster now, because it is seen as a way to wean Germany off the import of fossil fuels. So you have this whole wording of freedom energies now. The renewables are freedom energies. That's something we can talk about later as well. I find interesting from the wording. There was the decision to put coal plants that are being shut down because of Germany's shutdown agreement, to put them into a reserve instead of decommissioning them right away, to have them in case it's necessary for supply security. The government introduced 2 large relief packages for citizens and consumers with, you know, who are grappling with the high rising prices, energy prices, mostly gas and power, but oil and coal obviously also are more expensive. There is a lot of talk about hydrogen at the moment, and I remember that the Norwegian government and the German government announced that they would now look into building a hydrogen pipeline between the 2 countries. That's obviously not a short-term measure, but more of long-term thinking in terms of the energy transition. And the government has announced it will launch a major energy efficiency program. So how to save energy and be more efficient in industry production as well. So all these things have happened within a month, and that is it's remarkable. I mean, I've followed energy and climate. I've been following it now for about 6 years. The first 3 years, energy, of course, energy reporting has always been there, but the climate reporting was still a topic where you had to really look into the German publications, the large newspapers, and find these articles that talked about climate policy. That has, of course, changed over the past 3 years or so. Climate reporting is everywhere now. But this energy side of it all just came washing back in with the invasion of Ukraine and the effects it had on, or has on German policy. So it's an interesting time for an energy and climate reporter to do his job.
I believe it. There are a lot of different topics to be following at the moment. I have one quick follow-up. You did mention that in his speech, Scholz talked about building 2 LNG terminals. Of course, that's not something that can happen overnight, but is there a sense that this is something that will be fast-tracked, or is it how long would that take? I mean, what's a realistic expectation for how long that might take?
For so there are at least two different ones. The idea is you have a constructed solid LNG terminal onshore, where ships come and then you regasify and put the gas into the gas grid. Those types of terminals take a couple of years. So the earliest date I read, and that's the companies who want to build it themselves, and they are, of course, rather optimistic, but they say 24 could be a year. I think the government says it's more going to be towards 26, but that's, I think, the time frame that we're looking at for those terminals. But there is also the option of having floating terminals. So basically, you would have ships which exist. There are 30 or 40 ships of these around the world in existence today, and the German government together, or I mean the companies, RWE and Uniper, they are apparently in talks with the owners of those ships or operators of those ships to lease them and put them, get them to Germany. And one of these I've heard could be in operation already this coming winter. That would be really fast. If indeed they I think they put an option on these ships now, so they're still in negotiations. So whether the whole world, not the whole world, but a lot of people are looking for these kinds of ships at the moment. So whether and how many Germany gets, whether and where they then can be installed are next step questions. But I think it could start as early as this winter. But yeah, you are right. It's more of a long-term thing, which then again, that's a bit of my criticism. If you think long-term, and gas infrastructure is really long-term, and at the same time you think about your climate targets, whether it makes sense to build up that infrastructure now from a climate perspective, I would say no, definitely. Factoring in supply security questions and also now we have a situation where we want to do without Russian gas. That means the whole of import capacity of Europe might not be enough to replace that big gap that Russian supply leaves behind. So there are new factors in the equation now.
Mm-hmm. I have a question about sort of public sentiment from one of our viewers in Washington, D.C. She writes, can you comment on the lingering legacy of Germany's division on public opinion regarding Russia? Our viewer read that 55% of Germans support an embargo of Russian oil and gas, but 2/3 of those polled in Saxony, Sachsen-Anhalt, and Thuringia are against an embargo.
The East, with its history as the former GDR states, the ties to Russia have always been closer, which on the one hand ties to the East in general, or the former Soviet Union. So that on the one hand is a good thing in so many ways. I think the general connection from Eastern Germans to Poland are much closer than from the Western states. But yeah, that goes through all parts of society, I would say. You can see it in business, you can see it in politics, you can see it in the talks at the dinner table. So you can, if talking about Nord Stream 2, for example, it is landing in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, the northernmost states in the east, and there has always been a lot of support for this project. So if you went there and asked people on the street, they would be supportive, as has been their government. So the state government under the Social Democrats was very much pro this project. There were conferences that the government organized with kind of Eastern conferences where you have Russian and German business come together, and those were organized there, which they now put a halt to. But yeah, the ties have always been stronger in the East, and I think it still remains to be seen how that will change. I listened to a radio program this morning, public radio, Deutschlandfunk, and they always have listeners call in and ask questions or share their views. And that was, I mean, they choose who they put on air, so I cannot say whether it was representative of who called them, but that was a very mixed bag of views on the question of whether Germany should put down an embargo. You would have people who say you cannot do this to our economy. So many jobs will be lost. You had people say, well, look at the loss of life, and I mean the horrible pictures from this weekend. I mean. Those are powerful images that I think have an effect. And I don't only think that. I saw this morning or also yesterday in the news the reaction from politics to these images, but I think that these images will also have an effect on how society thinks, and so it was a very mixed bag this morning. I cannot say at this moment how this will change over the next couple of weeks, but yeah.
So I did want to ask you about that, and maybe you don't have an answer to this. You know, President Zelensky of Ukraine has called on EU countries to stop buying gas from Russia. His ambassador in Berlin has been very outspoken when it comes to Germany's gas and energy dependence on Russia. And now, of course, you know, and you alluded to this, we're seeing just these horrific images from Bucha, or Bucha, as I think it's called in Germany, and other areas that were abandoned by Putin's forces. And certainly, you know, there's been a response. Habeck and Baerbock have come out in favor of ramping up sanctions against Russia. Scholz and the SPD also seem, you know, open to stronger measures. Defense Minister Lamprecht talked about sanctioning gas imports. And so I was curious whether you have any insight into what sort of an impact this is having on public sentiment, not when it comes to the war, but when it comes to the energy issues.
I mean, the war changes everything in terms of energy supplies. So the images from this weekend, what type of impact they will have, I mean, it still, you know, it's unfolding as we speak. But the first comments from politicians, and there was a Green Party MP Hofreiter this morning who came out in favor of an embargo, when Habeck, the economy and climate minister, also from the Green Party, has been, just like Scholz and the rest of the government, have been very, very clear that they do not want an immediate embargo. So you might detect a little shift there this morning, and like I said, with this kind of situation, I don't want to make any predictions because things change so quickly, and things I thought were set in stone change so quickly. So I can very well imagine this turning out to be like some sort of turning point, and over the next days, when the EU talks about the next sanctions package, I can imagine there being something in there on energy. But then again, the German government, like I said, has been very, very clear, very vocal. There was no sort of in between the lines communication. They always said, we are so dependent on Russian fossil fuels that if these supplies were halted from one day to the next, hundreds of thousands of jobs are on the line, as well as industry companies would have to shut down. So it's been such a clear stance that it's hard for me to imagine how they will again shift so quickly and say, okay, now these images are so horrible, we'll go for an all-out embargo. But I could imagine that, like I said, with gas, it's more difficult to get off Russian supply for Germany, at least. But I could imagine, them agreeing something on oil, for example, because it's easier to substitute in Germany. It would still have negative effects in Germany, but maybe more bearable than if you include gas. So I think it is it's a question that's been on the plate for 4 weeks now, and so far clear stance from the government against it. But I could see that this is changing.
So sticking with the embargo issue for a moment, I have two viewer questions that tie in with that. One of them reads as follows: those arguing against an embargo talk about the severe economic consequences such a move would have. Does anyone really know how bad the economic consequences would be?
No.
You were shaking your head.
No. There are reports and comments coming out every day from economists, from other scientists, researchers, and they go in these directions. And some reports talk of GDP decline of 3%, and others say this it would be worse than 2008 to 2009 recession. And I would say it's very difficult to predict, and maybe impossible to predict, because it's a situation that hasn't happened before. When you listen to industry representatives these days, and especially the energy intensive industry, they warn very, very loudly against an embargo. So BASF, this huge German chemicals company, their CEO said, if we halt Russian gas supply and might, if BASF needs to stop production, that has a cascading effect on other industries, because they are at the first step, so to speak, of a lot of production processes. They with ammonia for fertilizers, for chemical products, but also medicine, and also for food. So this one company would, if they needed to halt production, then that would have an effect on BASF. I'm sure would not be at the top, not the first to go without gas. There are other companies that produce other things, which would have to halt production first. But this just shows at what kinds of things you have to look at to make any kind of prediction. And there's so many in other areas, so many other things that we simply don't know, cannot say, and would then have huge consequences if they happened.
So another viewer sort of describes the German business model as industrial production and large-scale export, hinging on cheap energy from Russia. The embargo discussions may have a transformative impact on Germany's business model and on its economic model if there's a change. So I guess the real question is, do you think that Germany might find itself needing to develop a new economic model because of the pressure of the energy challenges that Germany faces right now? Julian has frozen. I can't hear you.
I hope I'm back. I'm
You're
sorry
back.
about this. Yeah, I
That's
don't know
quite
what
all right.
happened.
That's quite all right.
Connection was gone. Sorry.
You froze, but that's quite all right. Thank you for tuning back in. I was just saying that we had a viewer who basically described the German business model as industrial production and large scale exports based on cheap energy from Russia. And this discussion that we're seeing today about an embargo will possibly lead to some fundamental discussions about a transformation of the German economic model. And the viewer's question is, what do you think? Is this really also a fundamental point, transition point, or inflection point for the German economy?
I would say this is a bit above my pay grade, but just taking a stab at it from an energy policy point of view, the talk at the moment is replacing the Russian supplies with other supplies. It is not about changing any sort of fundamental models here. That being said, the talk is also about accelerating the energy transition. So more domestic renewable electricity in the system, you know, the transition that's is going on and is supposed to be, the country wants to be climate neutral by 2045. That in and of itself is the transformation of Germany's economy. And whether that changes an economic model, you say that it's there, it really depends on what you're talking about. But that just sort of my 2 cents on this. At the moment, I don't think anybody is due to the war talking about changing the economic model.
Mm-hmm. So over the weekend, the president of Lithuania announced that his country has stopped importing natural gas from Russia as of this month. And he added that his country will rely on imports from other countries to meet its energy needs. And on Twitter, he even said, if we can do it, the rest of Europe can do it. Of course, it's fair to say that the situation in Lithuania is very different from other EU member states. Countries like Germany, France, and Italy could not easily make a similar move, as we've talked about, because they rely on much higher volumes of Russian gas, and they're bound to long-term contracts. But I guess one question that I have for you is do you think that this move by Lithuania has geopolitical significance in helping set a precedent for the EU or for other EU member states?
Let me be the skeptical journalist again here. I don't think so. Lithuania is such a small country, where it's enough to get a couple of LNG ships. They have an LNG import terminal, so they already have that going for them. It's much easier for them to switch because they are already supplied to a large extent through LNG. So getting the LNG from a different country instead of Russia is an easier switch for them. And then the magnitude is just completely different. I mean, Germany is Europe's largest economy. Last year, 55% of gas came from Russia. Gas is about a quarter, more than a quarter of German energy needs. So the industry is and especially so gas in Germany is used in industry and in heating. So a lot of it is for heating your room, whether it be households or shopping malls or whatever it is, and the other part is in industry, either for industrial processes where you need it and to make certain products, or you also need it to create the heat to make products. If you need this heat in certain products, then that's not easily replaceable with with electricity, for example. So since it's the industry depends on gas, and it's so much, it's really a different situation. So it's good that Lithuania can do that, and I think they also talk about their connection with Poland, a pipeline where they say they can then also get supply through there, not only their LNG terminal, but then you have to ask the question, okay, where is the gas going to come from that they want from that direction? Because all the gas that's in the system over there, minus the LNG that lands in Poland and Lithuania, is Russian pipeline gas. So whatever they buy there, even if it's not from Russia, is as of now would then still be Russian gas. And another thing is, for them to switch the system is much easier than for countries like Germany, because the whole gas infrastructure is built to transport gas from east to west, and halting that and in part switching that around, having gas from the Western countries come in and then transport it everywhere it's needed is again a monumental task for the gas industry. It's nothing that you can do from one day to the next. You have to. We talked to a gas industry representative last week, and he also spoke about the pressure that needs to be in the system. If you don't have the right pressure in the system, then certain end users cannot be supplied. Like the example of BASF, they need a certain amount of pressure to even keep their operations running. If that pressure is not there, and that can very, very quickly, very easily happen if you don't have the right supply coming in. And with LNG, you only need a storm on the Atlantic Ocean, and suddenly you don't have LNG ships coming in for 2 weeks. You don't have that pressure anymore in the system, and a company like BASF has to shut down operations. So it's just huge problems weaning Germany off gas. Some of those Lithuania surely has as well, but just at a much smaller scale. So setting a precedence, I would be skeptical.
Julian, I want to thank you so much for joining us for today's Kaffeepause. This has been a very informative conversation, and I'm happy that we were able to do more of a deep dive into some of the energy issues that we've touched on in many of our other discussions. And so thank you for joining us today. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me. It was a good thing to talk, and I just want to invite all listeners to also get in touch directly if you have questions. Clean Energy Wire, we're not only reporting on things, but we also support journalism on energy and climate. So especially journalists, if you have questions on your research, just get in touch. You'll find my email on the website, and always happy to help.
Well, thank you very much. Stay well, and to our viewers, stay well as well. And I wish everybody a good start to the week.
Bye-bye, Stephen. Thank you.